everyone. Thanks for coming in today. This is the best practices session. My name is Alex Ren.
I'm Paulina. We are research engineers with VivLab's Samsung Electronics.
And we made Bixby. And we're here to share some tips and tricks for helping you along in your capsule development. Before we get started, we wanted to introduce ourselves a bit. Again, my name is Alex. I actually grew up as a young child in a Mandarin-speaking household, and I didn't hear a single word of English until I started preschool. So I remember clearly how it feels to not understand a language. Fast forward a bit, I ended up studying linguistics in college, and I've always been fascinated by the structure and nuance of human language. I ended up here at VivLab's Samsung Electronics, working on the Bixby AI conversational assistant. And I'm really excited to teach Bixby how to understand human speech. And I'm excited to teach you how to teach Bixby.
Like Alex, I don't have a traditional computer science background. I studied bioengineering in college, and I researched animals to understand the mechanics behind their movement, and then directly applied that to robotics. So we studied the American cockroach, which is the fastest land invertebrate, and we made origami robots that are some of the fastest in the world. This might seem like a very odd and niche thing to study, but the principles we learned about movement actually had a wide range of applications. So we collaborated with other scientists, engineers, and physicians, and we made limb prosthetics, better physical therapy, better robots for search and rescue and mine detection. And then I made a career change to software engineering, but I still do the same thing that I really enjoy of researching, finding principles, and sharing them with others so that they can make great products and tools too. So at Samsung, I built the foundational Bixby capsules. I gather the best practices, and then now we're here to share them with you so you can build great Bixby capsules. In today's session, we're going to be building on top of a space resorts capsule that our colleague Sarah made earlier today in her Building Your First Capsule session. Can I get a raise of hands for who has attended? Cool, okay, great. So it's a really cool session. I encourage you to go watch it if you haven't. It'll be available on the dev portal on the webinars tab. I'm going to do a quick recap now, and then we'll build on top of that. So I've been saying this word Bixby capsule, and what does it actually mean? To a consumer, when they speak to their phone, it's just their natural language input, so something like in the Space Resorts capsule, find space resorts, show me a resort on Jupiter, search for space resorts with low gravity, and goes into your phone. They don't know what happens back there, but Bixby understands and gives you back speech dialogue, like I found these space resorts, and a visual view. So we have listed space resorts here. To the Bixby developer, this is more than just that. We have a collection of files that you build. We have models that describe your domain to Bixby. So we have concepts that are kind of the nouns, like the space resort is a noun, planets are a noun, gravity is a noun, and then we have actions, which is what Bixby can do in your domain. So find space resorts is a noun, a verb. So on top of that, we have UI. So we have the visual layouts and dialogues, the audio dialogues that you can tell Bixby how to visualize and display your results back to the user. And we have files for teaching Bixby about how to deal with natural language. So a vocabulary, different ways people might say something, and then training so it understands when user says something, what they mean by it. And why is this cool to build a Bixby capsule? Well, it's accessible and user-oriented. Like Alex and I, we don't come from traditional computer science backgrounds, but we built some of the capsules you already see in your N9s. You don't need a PhD or machine learning background for this. You don't need to know how to build an Android app from scratch, and later on, when you move to other devices, you don't know how to build full-on things for those too. We provide the tools to train Bixby to perform tasks in your domain. Let's go over to a live demo on the Bixby Developer Studio that is now available to external developers. Alex will help me walk through this. So we have a Space Resorts capsule here. It's going to be slightly different from the one you saw in Sarah's earlier session because we're going to build on top of it. We added a kind of quick book Space Resort action. We'll talk about that later. For now, let's go back over the Find Space Resorts use case. So first, we want to define our models, our concepts. We have things called primitives. So these are like primitive things like text, booleans, integers. If you look at planet, that is an enum. So it's a finite list of planets because we know exactly how many planets there are in the solar system. We have search criteria, another way to look for planets. This is a name, and it's like short phrases that you can say to Bixby for different things you might want in your hotel or your space resort. And then we have structures. These will have properties. So the space resort contains a list of properties for what space resort it has. So what planet it's on, what gravity it has, maybe some images. And the properties can be primitives or also structures themselves. Now we have the nouns. Let's make the verb the action. Find space resorts, we just say what inputs it takes. So in this case, a planet and a search criteria, and then what it outputs is the space resort. You can see there's no actual logic behind this. You can add JavaScript into your local capsule here, or you can point it to a remote endpoint, or you can set up your own server and send back JSON from that. So now you have your concepts and your actions. Let's define our UI. So let's go over to our resources folder. Under base, we have our dialogues and layouts. So let's look at our layouts for how we would actually display our space resorts. So if you go to the result view, we have defined how you would display multiple results. So greater than one, we would have a list and has a summary of space resorts. And then if we go down, we have size result equal 1, so it's just one result. And this has a different kind of layout. It's an image carousel and details. And then we have dialogues. We're not going to go into the actual files, but you can see that we have, let's just expand that and see we have different modes, like if you found a space resort versus you didn't. Basically, you can say different things for that. So UI is done. Now you can train it. Let's go over to our training tool, which is really great because we don't have to be natural language processing experts. Let's just go into our training tool where we can add natural things people would say to your friend, or in this case, the Bixby assistant, like research space resorts on Mercury. And then it has a goal, so what you would want the end of it. And if you have inputs, like Mercury, the planet, you can mark that up as well. And then when you've made a starting set of trainings, you can compile this. Bixby learns it, and then you can start testing it out in the simulator. So let's go over to our simulator. It has a text box on the left where you can enter text. So this can be your natural language queries to Bixby. And then on the right is what would show up on an actual device. So let's start with find space resorts. See, we don't have to say anything like goal space resorts with inputs this. We just say find space resorts, and it understands that's what we want. This was the list of summaries. We can click on one, and now it's just one result. You want something toasty, Alex? Okay, so this is the detail page with the image carousel, so you can scroll. And then there's the details underneath with all these features. So this is the starting Find Space Resorts capsule, and we are going to build on top of it. Let's move back to the slides. Blue, I think. Nope. Okay. So we have our starting Space Resorts capsule that you can find space resorts. Let's make it better with some of the things we've learned from building Bixby ourselves. Alex is going to talk about accelerating user interactions. So from starting a conversation in Bixby to the end result, we want to make that as fast as possible. And then I'll go over using library capsules, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel for common concepts like time and geo. And then at the end, Alex will go over a quick checklist of things you want to do for your Bixby capsule, so that'll be one of the first to launch when Marketplace is available. So Alex, let's start with accelerating interactions.
Thank you, Paulina. This section will be about accelerating user interactions. Now, what we saw there was a list of space resorts. And I think that that's not a bad start. But an assistant can be more helpful than that. We know our domain. We know space resorts. We can recommend better results, such as, and based on some criteria, such as popularity, price, distance. And in Bixby, we call this the highlight system. Here's before we add a highlight. And here on the right, after we define highlights in our view files, you can see we have a larger view of the mercurial, a little text describing why it's an interesting result, it's a hot destination. We made this really easy to add to your capsules. Let's take a look at how we might do that. So if we switch over to the IDE, and just as a review, if we find space resorts right now, we just get a list of space resorts, which is not bad. But imagine you're a first-time user. You don't really know much about space resorts. You don't know, what makes some place interesting or not. We, as owners of our capsule, can do something to help the user. Now, if we go back in the IDE and look at the result view, and in this case, we want to add in this highlight block. This says that there is a highlight, and this is a simpler example. We're using a filter by keyword to pick a space resort that has a highlight. This is something that we defined ourselves. So if we go back into the simulator and quickly reset and run that again, find space resorts. Wow. Bixby has already taken care of it for us. Mercurial, hot destination, and anything that wasn't highlighted is still there for the user to see under more results. Now, let's take a look back at the slides. I think that it's great that we brought something to the top. It's a hot destination. But this is going to be the same for every user. Now, Bixby can do something better than that. We call it preference learning. We want to build a personalized experience in Bixby that keeps users coming back. For example, I might like moon resorts. So when I say, find me a space resort, Europa's Jewel is a great choice for me. You can use Bixby's machine learning to show personalized results for each user. It's 2 simple steps. 1, mark features as preferable in your models. And 2, highlight the results in your view. We'll jump back into the IDE to show you the coding part of this. So, first step, the model. Let's look at the space resort. There's a lot of properties here, but what might a user prefer? Maybe I prefer Mars, or I prefer a hotel of a certain name. We just add this features block with the preferable block. And as you can see here, we can add preference for anything in here that the space resort has.
You can add multiple preferences, like anything, any property in here, because is there a lot in here?
Well, maybe not everything.
What if I wanted to prefer description?
Let's try that.
What is this?
Looks like we have an error here. This is a preferable cannot be of type text.
What does that mean?
Great question, Paulina. Let's jump back to the slides and take a look. So preferables can be of type enum, Boolean, name, or qualitative primitive. In short, it means that this value needs to be something that makes sense to a Bixby system. So it doesn't make sense for Bixby or even a human to prefer a text description of something. It doesn't make sense. If you need to prefer something, like an integer, for example, like a star rating for a hotel or a space resort, we offer a way to do that. More details are available in the docs. You can map any of these unallowed types into allowable types. So how does this preference learning work? Quick review. Well, Bixby will start to learn automatically about the user when they make requests or selections. Like when I tap on a Europa, Bixby will learn that I might like Europa. But just because I looked at it doesn't mean I necessarily like it. Bixby will prompt the user to confirm their preferences in the home screen. Then only after that will that information be made available to your capsule. And it's to your capsule only. We take privacy very seriously. Now, I want to show you how easy it is to add this preference highlighting in the code. Now let's jump back to the result view for space resorts. And this was the section we added back before. The section we added before for highlights. But it's very easy to say we want this highlight to be based on user preference. We need to replace this block with order by instead. So the AUDI is auto-completing here and showing available keys. You can access that with escape key, sorting by preferences. And just like that, when Bixby is confident about a user's preference, that will become the user's highlight. And you can have other highlights that are still based on your own domain-specific rules. You can have as many as you want to find, actually. The Bixby will pick the top 3 and without picking any duplicates for you, for the user. So it's very simple for you to highlight preferences for your user. We're going to jump back to the slides for a moment here. This is what you get after perhaps I click around and I've chosen Europa's jewel. And Bixby's learned that. Next time I come back, Europa's jewel will be near the top or on top. In summary, we annotate the preferable properties, and Bixby learns from the user requests and selections, and then your capsule code can take advantage of these learned preferences. Now, that's one way we can help the user, by showing them results they like. Now, I want to show you another way that Bixby can help accelerate user interactions. We call it selection learning. But before that, this is a new scenario that we've added on to what our colleague Sarah built before. We've found a good space resort, and we want to book it. To book a space resort or a hotel, you might need some more information from the user, like, when are you staying, how many people, what kind of room do you want, all these kind of questions. And when Bixby is missing a value, it can prompt the user, such as here. If I say I want to book a space resort, Bixby asks me, which space resort would you like? And this is fine if there's only one thing to ask, but what if there's many choices to make? Every time I want to book a space resort, it keeps asking me all these questions. That's a lot of questions to ask. And Bixby, we have a few solutions. One of them might be a default select. It's a key you can add to any input and make a default selection. I don't think that's very surprising, but we can do better than that with Bixby. our solution to the selection problem, the problem of making the user make lots of choices, is to learn how the user makes their choices, and so we don't have to ask them for a choice every single time. We want to get to build a true digital assistant that knows you personally. And in Bixby, we call this selection learning. Selection learning will pick different choices for different users once it's confident. For example, I like to travel alone, so when I book a space resort, Bixby can default to 1 astronaut for Paulina.
I like to travel with my family, so I want 4 astronauts.
How do we do this? First, we define a strategy to learn which choice is best for the user, and then we add with learning to the input. But wait, what is a strategy? So the specifics of strategies are a little deep to cover in this introduction, but in short, a strategy defines a feature that Bixby can learn on. For example, if you're learning about the which type of room a user prefers, some things that might matter include how big it is, how much it costs, whether or not it has a great view. These are things that are features that matter to a user, and you can teach Bixby which features matter. And then Bixby's learning algorithms will do all the hard work for you. I wanted to show you how easy it is to add with learning to your inputs. So from our example before, asking for a number of astronauts. If we see here in this block, we have a default select block, and then the with rule here, it just selects a default of 2 astronauts when Bixby is not confident. But with learning, using the strategies that we've written, we can choose the best choice for each user. As simple as that. For more information on how to write the strategies, please refer to the documentation.
So yeah, that seems pretty simple, Alex. Those are just numbers. You can memorize that. Anyone could do that.
Yes, the number of astronauts is a simple example. It's not rocket science, but Bixby selection learning can do even more. I want to share with you how selection learning helped me develop Uber. Now imagine a user that makes these choices. They take an Uber pool for the work commute because it's the cheapest, and then Uber X for weekend travel, perhaps because it's the fastest. But Bixby can actually learn a pattern of behavior beyond the ride type so that, for example, if the fastest ride available is not the usual type that the user chooses, we can still pick the fastest ride type for the user automatically. This relies on a combination of strategies, such as the type of Uber, the simplest one, but also the price of the Uber and how close the nearest ride is. And you can think of other strategies too, like how long the ride is and many other things. Another place where selection learning helped was with geo, and specifically a weather capsule. What's the weather in Dublin? For the majority of the world, this is asking for the weather in the capital of Ireland, but for people in the Bay Area, it means the Dublin nearby. And we have a community learning option that lets users teach Bixby which choice is best for each region, and this is all hands-off from the developer. We give the strategies, like how far is the city from the user, and Bixby can learn from that.
Wait, but what if I'm an Irish person living in the Bay Area, and when I'm asking about the weather in Dublin, I mean my home country, Ireland?
Well, that's true, and basically what Paulina is saying is that selection learning could make the wrong choice, and we have a solution for that too. All the choices made are transparent for the user. We have an understanding page the user can reach for the Note 9 that's swiping down and during a conversation with Bixby. And it shows what Bixby understood, and it also shows what choices Bixby made. So here being the Dublin example, what's the weather in Dublin? Dublin is marked as something that Bixby understood here and made this choice for the user. And if you tap on this, you can correct Bixby. And so once Paulina changes it to Ireland, it will stay Ireland for her, but not change the default for the majority of people in this area who are asking about Dublin nearby. A quick summary: we write strategies to learn user choices, Use with learning to let Bixby pick for the user, and users can see the choices made and correct them if needed. That's selection learning. And with preference learning, highlighting what the user likes when they're just browsing, and selection learning, making choices for the user intelligently, we can accelerate user interactions and let them, basically it means that each time they come back to the capsule knows them better and keeps them moving quicker and lets them get things done faster. I wanted to hand the stage back to Paulina, who's going to tell us a bit about libraries that we've built for Bixby.
Thanks, Alex. So now that we're getting other developers out there to build capsules, we're really excited to see what people might come up with. But we're going to start to run into some common concepts. Like even with space resorts and Uber, they both have to know, Bixby has to know about time for both. And we don't want every developer to have to reinvent these concepts of time and geo and distance. So we've built library capsules for developers to import into their capsules. We have some available libraries like time, geo, image, measurement, contact money. There are more. You can find out the documentation for this on the Bixby Developer Center. You get to see all the library capsules available, what concepts there are in there, and how to use them. Today I'm going to go over two of our most popular library capsules, the time library and the geo library. So I'll use the time library in our space resorts capsule since we had talked about booking a space resort and you want to know when you're going to stay there. And then I'll go more into detail on the geo library that we use in the already launched capsule for weather. Let's start with time. So when you're booking a space resort, you have to specify when. And if you're thinking about you're calling someone on the phone to book this, you're going to be telling them when you want to stay. You're going to say things like over the weekend, first week of July, for the next 3 days, December 10th to 15th, starting from the third Monday in December, the week of Thanksgiving. There's so many ways to describe time. So how do we deal with this? And what concepts do we have to define? Do we have to define hours, seconds, like day, date, year? How do we differentiate between relative and absolute time, like 3 days from now versus December 20th, 2010? What about holidays for different countries too? How do we train Bixby to recognize these? How do we resolve these to actual date-time objects?
Paulina, this sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like it's as big as a capsule.
Yeah, you're right. Why are we wasting our time working on time in space resorts? Yeah, don't waste your time. Use ours. We've built the time library for you. There's already concepts defined in there, like date for December 12th, date time for Sunday noon, so it has the day and the noon time, date interval, so starting date Monday to ending date Wednesday, date time interval now, so whatever time now is, till 7 p.m. tomorrow. We also have abstraction for training, so you don't have to worry about marking March 12th as a date versus this weekend as date time interval when you're writing new training examples in your training tool. You can mark any time description as time.datetime expression, and Bixby will do the work of making that back into whatever date time concept you want. We also have predefined UI kit components, so when you want to ask the user for certain time concepts, you don't have to worry about making a nice picker. You can use our date picker, our time picker, our calendar, depending on your needs. So how do we add this? Well, actually, don't add water. We have steps for you. First, you want to import the library in your capsule Bixby file. This is an overview, so I'll go over this in a live demo. But for now, we want to have an overview of importing the library, adding the relevant concepts, putting them into your action inputs and structure properties, and then creating views with UI components, and then adding training examples in case your user is going to say the time instead of tapping on your phone. So let's actually see this at work in the Space Resorts capsule. We have a book Space Resorts action already, but this is actually a fake one, so it's going to come up with a fake reservation. If you want to learn how to actually make a real reservation with transactions, we have a session tomorrow by our teammate Sia, so I recommend you go see that in the morning if you want to learn how to make money with Bixby. For now, let's look at our our space resorts capsule and do the first step of importing time into your capsule. So you go to the capsule Bixby file. This is kind of like your settings for your capsule. It has the version number for your capsule, but also lets you import other capsules. So we see that we have import viv time as time version blah, blah, blah. It's a number that will be updated as we make more updates to time. And then we say as time, so it's an alias that you can use later on in your capsule.
I see this version from as well. What is this?
Yeah, good question. So we actually have this other library capsule called Entity, and what it does is it imports a lot of the other popular capsules. So Entity imported common. So now you can say version from Entity for common, and you don't have to say the number for common anymore. So when you start to go and make a really complicated capsule with, let's say, time, geo, common, these all are imported by Entity, and you can just say version from Entity for these 3 other capsules, and you never have to worry about updating the number for that one. Just keep your Entity version up to date. So see how there's no error after we switched it to version from Entity? Well, it works fine. And now we're ready to use time in our capsule. We are talking about staying over a date interval. So let's go to our concepts and actually make sure that we have this time.date interval working. So we have this space resorts date interval. It's a structure, but see it has no properties. All we're saying is roll off time.date interval. So the time alias is there to tell it you're taking this date interval from the time capsule. Another way you can borrow concepts from another imported capsule is to say extend, so it's another key instead of roll off. So if we change that to extend, you can now add new properties on top of the time.date interval concept. You can also override old properties in the time.date interval concept, and this will just stay within your capsule. Okay, so now we have the space resort date interval. Step 3, add it to your action inputs and your structure properties. So we have book space resort here. Let's go to it. And we see that it has a bunch of inputs already, like the space resort you're staying at, the number of astronauts. And then the last one is date interval. Oh, not last one, but we have date interval in there as well, the type. And we say date interval here with no time dot because we've already made our own space resort dot date interval that takes the time dot date interval concept. So we have that in our action. Let's make sure that the output, which is, if you scroll to the end, is a reservation structure. Let's make sure that reservation structure also has this property. So if we go in there, we have the property date interval and the time date interval. So everything is set to use this time.date interval. And then when we're asking the user for when they want to stay, they might not want to talk it out. They might want to just tap on your screen. So let's make sure we have an input view for that. Let's go to our layouts, book, date interval input view. And you see this render part. You can say calendar, allow range, and it just gives more settings for how you want to set up your calendar input. But if you click on your keyboard escape after render, you see that we have a lot more options for what kind of ways you want to ask people for inputs. So you can also go on the docs and see what other ways you can play around with how you want to make views. Okay, so now we have our visual input view. Let's actually see this at work. So how about we go in the simulator and see if we can run book space resorts. So first we find our space resort. Okay, I think it's not trained for book space resorts.
Okay.
So let's do a live adding of a training for book space resorts. Right now we only have for find space resorts.
Okay.
Okay, let's run it. Guess it didn't compile earlier. Okay, so now if you scroll to the top, you see it's asking which space resort would look like. So this is actually a prompt for you to select. It's no longer just giving results. If we click on one to stay at, we can book it. Are you happy with that, Alex?
Yeah, let's go with it.
Okay. So you book it, And we can say, when do we want to stay? And this is the calendar component that we had added earlier. So, wow, Alex, you want to go right now?
Yeah. Let's go.
Okay. You can choose the room. I'll let you choose it. So this is our fake reservation. You get to see how to make the real thing tomorrow. But you can see we have our inputs. The number of astronauts is actually, it already uses the default select that Alex had talked about earlier. And then dates, it's that November 7th to 8th that Alex had picked in the calendar input. And then we have the package, the lab, which is kind of the room he's staying at. I don't want to click on the calendar input view. I want to actually say it to Bixby. I mean, that's one of the cool things is training abstraction. So let's actually start from the beginning and say, like, let's book a space resort for next weekend. I don't really want to rush out to one today. Yep, let's add it. We'll have to say reservation because Bixby has not been trained much on understanding reservations, so we'll just have to keep adding them until Bixby learns. So reservation, and then let's mark up next weekend with that time.datetime expression because we're abstracting it, so we never have to tell Bixby what next means and what weekend means. We don't have to say, hey, next is like kind of a relative term, and weekend is kind of a nickname for a date interval. So just say time.datetime expression. That's all we have to do. It comes up with a plan for us on how to get from our starting talk to the reservation at the end. And let's actually run this. So we've compiled it so Bixby learns. Yep. And we can go back to our simulator and tell Bixby this. How would we say this weekend? I think I want to break this weekend, actually. Okay, where would you like to stay? Looks good? Yep. And see, it skipped over the calendar input now because we already told Bixby from the start we wanted this weekend. So, the lab. And we have November 9th to 11th there. We never had to tell Bixby how to interpret this weekend and change it into an actual date interval. So that's the power of using a library capsule, is you don't have to worry about the nitty-gritty details of building time. Let's move back to the slides. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick run-through of the geo library capsule. It's already used in a bunch of our launch capsules. One of them is weather. So checking the weather, sometimes you want to specify where. And when you're talking to someone else, you might just say, what's the weather in California? The Big Apple, at SFO, the capital of Malaysia, none at all. And how do we handle this? What concepts do we define? How do we train for these? How do we resolve these to actual geographical objects? What do you have no location specified?
I'm feeling kind of lost here.
Well, you shouldn't be. We'll help you find your place with the geo library capsule. So geo is a very complex domain. And this is just the tip of the iceberg for what concepts are already available, like country division, geopoint, current location, like stuff like latitude and longitude is also on there. And then we also have abstraction for training, like we did in time. We have two options depending on your use case. Geo search term is what we use in weather. So it's because weather, you're kind of asking for a specific point, the closest weather tower. But if you're looking for a place to eat, you might want a general region. So we can say geo.search region and look for restaurants in a general region like Paris. And then we also have UI kit components available. If you're asking for an input and your user just wants to tap on your phone, you can use an autocomplete renderer in the input view and combine that with a geo autosuggest action. And this will help the user get to their address or whatever place they want to go to faster. You can show maps, pins. Alex had talked about this idea of Dublin CA versus Ireland earlier. These are predefined selection strategies that are already in place in the geo library. And then we also help you deal with a user's current location too. So if your user doesn't want to say where they're checking the weather, you can default to that. And that was just geo and weather and time and space resorts. There's so many other ways we can use these libraries in other capsules. You could use the money library in the commerce capsule. You can use measurements library in the speedometer capsule. We're really excited to see what other developers come up with. So once again, we have a lot of ducks for this. We're excited to see what you guys come up with. In summary, your capsule should focus on your domain. Keep it in scope and don't worry about things like time and geo that we handle. We already give you the predefined concepts and UI components in these libraries. You just import, add the concepts, actions, UI, and train. I'll hand it back to Alex. He's going to give you a quick checklist of how to get your capsule ready for marketplace.
Thanks, Paulina. So, as you heard today in our keynote, we're opening up Bixby Developer Studio to everyone, and soon we'll have a marketplace where you can release your capsules. These are very short checklists on things you'll need before you release. A capsule name and icon to give your capsule an identity. Hints to help users get started in your capsule. Targets to make sure you're targeting the right devices. And more, which will be available in the docs. But let's cover these few things. Now, this is the icon and capsule name. For us, we've defined that the icon is this Bixby logo and the name is Space Resorts. This comes from this file here, Bixby info. The key takeaway here is that you want to make sure that your capsule is branded so that users know what capsule they're talking to. Here's another important page. This is the hints page. You want to show users what your capsules can do. They can find this page later on in the marketplace, and it'll be showing them basically the domain of your space resort, of your capsule. And for space resorts, we make it very clear these should be very salient goals, like things that you really want to cover. These are core use cases for your capsule. And not only is it a listing of things that the user can say, the users can also tap on any of the hints. For example, tap this hint here. And it immediately opens Bixby, having run that utterance for the user. And the user is in your capsule, ready to continue. The last file I want to talk about is this capsule.bxb file. Here you can define the target. And as we heard today in the keynote, there'll be many targets coming in the future. But for now, we have a Bixby Mobile, English US, for this Space Resorts capsule. If you're interested in seeing how you might localize a capsule, I encourage you to check out the schedule and come to tomorrow's localization and device targeting session. Here's a quick summary of everything we covered today. I showed you how to accelerate user interactions with preference and selection learning to help personalize your capsule for every user. Paulina showed us how to use libraries to save time and find your place in our code. And I just showed you how to prepare your capsule for marketplace. There's much more to come as we move into 2019. Here's some more things. Hands-free, eyes-free, payment system, on-device testing, everything to support our developers. And here's the schedule for tomorrow. Please come to both of them if you're interested. Our teammate Sia will be showing how to build a transactional capsule. And our colleagues from Korea, Danny will be showing us how to localize a capsule. Please rate us. We love talking to you.
So, thanks for coming to our session. I know it's the last in the day. We'll be available in the code lab after this. And for the rest of tomorrow, if you want to talk more about Bixby or just ask me weird bug questions.
Thank you very much.